Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Led to Gold. This is the podcast devoted to discussing all things growth and wellness, and I am so happy to have you here today for episode 38. This is going to be very different from any content that I have done before on the show, and I'm really excited to bring it to you. I'm also a little bit nervous just because it is maybe in some spheres a little bit of a controversial topic, but we're going to do it anyway. So just before we get started, I will give you the usual spiel at the beginning of every episode. If you enjoy this episode, or if you have been listening for a while and you've enjoyed the show and you haven't rated the show wherever you're listening, it would mean the absolute world to me if you could take just a moment to do that wherever you're listening. If you want to leave a comment, if that's even possible, that would be wonderful. Aside from that, there are other things that I'm doing out there in the world. And if you didn't know, Led to Gold is also a blog. So while episodes come out on the podcast every other Monday, the adjacent Mondays are when new blog posts come out. It's been a little bit spotty the past couple of weeks, I'm not going to lie, just because school is crazy. This is not my main career. I am also a high school English teacher, so there's a lot going on over here. And I teach AP Lang, so right leading up to the exam period, it was quite literally grading 100 essays a week on top of this, on top of trying to do blog posts, and it just, something's got to give at some point. So they've been a little spotty, but we are back because the exam is over. The school year is almost over, and I am trying so hard to settle into that nice new open space that has come along with being done with grading essays. I love it. It's something that I super duper get into, and I really don't get tired of it, but man, it's nice to not have to do that like literally every night. So anyway, if you like what we talk about on the show and you want a little bit more of it in the form of writing, you can follow the link in the description in the show notes and go check out the blog as well. If you want to subscribe to the blog, it's completely free, but you'll get a nice, cute little monthly newsletter from me, and those include exclusive playlists that relate to whatever zodiac sign we are currently in. If that is something that interests you, I work really hard on them. I love making them, and I would love to share them with you. So that's all a thing as well, all free. Now, if you would love to support me in a monetary way, the last offering that I have for you is some merch, and that's all over at TeePublic. I have shirts, I have mugs, I have stickers, I have pretty much whatever your little heart would desire in the form of merch, and that is all in the show notes. So if you feel like doing any of those things, that's wonderful, and if not, I'm just happy you're here. So thank you, and let's get into it. One other little caveat that I'll start the show with is, I don't know if you can tell, I feel like I'm sounding okay right now, but I am super sick right now. So I apologize if that is coming off in my voice. I apologize if there is like some sniffling going on, but I'm going to do my best to keep it under control. And I'll just say too that I think all of this ties into the fact that I was just talking about the AP exam just ending. It was on Tuesday of this week. It's now Thursday. And I swear to you, I feel like this is a pretty universal thing, but like I have been go nonstop for weeks, if not months leading up to this. The day after the exam, I got sick. So I took off of work today. I have been so achy and exhausted. And I literally I don't know how much square footage my little backyard is. It's not very big. I went out there and tried to push mow it earlier today, and I first off could not stop sneezing, and then second, I was just so exhausted by the end of it. Like, it was like I had spent 2 hours at the gym. I'm not even joking. So that's where we're at. Anyway, we're going to do our best. Like I said, I'm really excited to get into this conversation today, but it is quite different than what we talk about as per usual on Lead to Gold. However, it does still fit into the realm of growth and wellness, because what I want to ultimately talk about today is shifting our collective mindset on sex. You heard me. We're having a sex talk today, but we are having a different kind of sex talk. I want to be super clear right up front and just kind of set the tone. This is not a conversation where I'm going to be talking about like actual PIV sex. This is not going to be any form of relationship counseling, although that could potentially get into this conversation a little bit, but that's not the main goal. This is not about porn. This is not about any of our collective understanding of sex. This is a conversation where we will hopefully destigmatize sexual energy and the concept of sex and the concept of talking about sex. And I'll also start off just by giving us a little bit of context and a little bit of where I'm coming from in this conversation. It's come up for me because I have been kind of listening back to some things that I was reading and listening to probably a year or so ago. And it kind of just like hit me like a ton of bricks that it's something I'm really passionate about, but I have not felt confident or practiced or knowledgeable enough to bring this to this space. But I don't know. I think I've had some time to reflect and get back into that. And now I do. I would at least like to attempt it. The first piece of context that I want to provide is that I read Pussy, A Reclamation by Regina Tomschauer about a year ago. And that book was, I had thoughts about it. It was okay. And I'm not going to get into my full review of the book. In fact, I actually have a full review of it on the blog that I will post in the show notes if you're interested in reading that. It's pretty short. I had thoughts. There were parts of it that I didn't love, but the main idea of that book I absolutely loved and am 100% behind. And the concept is that pussy is a bad word. The fact that I just said it, in all honesty, still makes me like cringe a little bit. It still immediately makes me think, oh God, as soon as I say that word, somebody's going to turn this episode off. They don't want to hear about it. It's a bad word. And the book goes into all of the ways in which women in particular, but you know, sex has been labeled as this awful, dirty, frowned upon, like disgusting thing that we don't want to look at. And it's only reserved for certain kinds of people, and it's only reserved for certain places. And other than that, like it has no purpose in the rest of society. It is a pariah, the whole act of sex. And I actually wanted to read a little bit from the book because she goes into this in the very beginning, and I think it sets the rest of the book up really well. So she says on page 24, this is in like the first chapter, why do you have to use that word? I hear this from women all the time. Pretty much as soon as I pull out the P word, someone gets up in arms. If you get a rather unfriendly feeling when that word appears, I'm not at all surprised. You are very likely in the majority. To those of us growing up in our patriarchal culture, pussies themselves are terrifying. They are desired and defiled in equal measure. They are powerful, messy, mysterious, and unknown. We are warned that pussies are what men want from us, as a receptacle for them. Yet at the same time, we are taught that they are utterly disgusting. They bleed, they push out babies, they have orgasms in capricious and unpredictable ways. We are told they smell funny, and we are sold endless products to rid ourselves of their pesky fragrance. They are often considered ugly and in need of grooming in order to be presentable. We women shy away from them, and our men do not understand them. So when someone casually drops the P-bomb, it results in a historical and experimental reverb that is much louder than the word itself. Okay, now this is on page 30. When we ignore our pussy reality, our pleasure, our erotic essence, our true nature, the gifts of the GPS, what she calls the great pussy in the sky, and prioritize the values of patriarchal world culture, we start to shrink. Everything in our world is disadvantaged because we are not present. Our truth is not present because our desires are not present. And our desires are not present because the only way for a woman to connect with her desire is to connect with her pleasure. When a woman does not connect with her pleasure, the lights go off inside of her and inside of her family and her world. A woman can't do her job of being a woman without her sensual brilliance engaged. We think we're flawed and we think we need to fix ourselves somehow. What we don't recognize is that the only thing we're missing is the sensual intelligence that comes from a connection to our very source. But can we really blame ourselves? We women learn to doubt ourselves by the time we're 5 or 6. At that age, I had already decided that the goddess was something outside of me. I had pushed her into the periphery. Interestingly, it was around the same time that I, like all other little girls in our culture, learned that pussy was unspeakable. So where must we go when we are finally ready to bring the goddess back into our lives? I just really like this because I think it showcases super well the disempowerment that comes along with painting sex and genitalia as evil, dirty, weird things that we just like should not look at, even though they are literally a part of our body. Like they are a part of our entire life and the reason why we are here, which we'll get into. But before I get into that, I do want to also bring up a couple of things that I picked up and learned as a kid that feed into this conversation. For example, the fact that just like Regina Thomas Shower talks about how pussy is a bad word, sex is also a bad word in our culture. For me specifically, it was completely fine to hear and in some extent use the word sexy, but sex was a completely different and unapproved word. That was not something that was supposed to be in my vocabulary. If I ever heard that word, it kind of sounded an alarm bell of like, this is inappropriate. This isn't for me. I shouldn't be listening to this. And I'm not just talking about like being a little kid, although sexy as a little kid was a fine word. It was like, okay, whatever. But sex was not. Even as I got older, the same rules applied. And I can remember seriously, like so vividly, watching the behind the scenes of like the filming of the movie Grease, which I loved as a kid and I still love. And we won't talk about the fact that there's a lot of sex and innuendos that go on in that movie because I did not understand that that's what was going on. And to a degree, that's fine. As a little kid, it's whatever. However, I remember in these behind the scenes things, they were talking about how they styled Sandy's look for the end of the movie. And you all, I'm sure, I hope, know what I'm talking about, where she wears like the really tight black cat suit and she has her hair different and she's wearing makeup. And instead of calling her sexy, which would have been something that wouldn't have struck a chord with me, they talked about her sex appeal. And for some reason, I remember that being very weird to me. As soon as I heard the word sex appeal, I felt like I shouldn't be watching this. I have to turn it off. This is inappropriate. And I think another thing that just kind of drives all of this home and drives all of this to the point that I want to make is the fact that when this episode gets published, I'm going to have to mark it as explicit because it's a conversation about sex, which is like, I get it. I get it because of the culture that we live in, but what I hope to achieve and what I hope to see within my lifetime is a reworking of the ways that we think about and have conversations about sex. So what we are going to talk about now is the fact that when you get into the realms of, I don't want to say chakras, that's probably not exactly what I'm thinking, but energy fields in the body. There's the sacral chakra, right? And that is basically right around where your reproductive organs lay. And this chakra or this energy field is also considered to be where your creative energy stems from. So there's really no coincidence to me, and it has always made perfect sense to me that those two places and things go together because sex is creation. That's it. Sexual energy is creative energy. And what do I mean by that? I want us to think about it like this for just a moment. Every single living thing on this earth was created through the act of sex in some way. Every single thing. Every animal, every plant, everything. All of it. That's so insanely powerful and so, to me, in a way, miraculous and sacred and incredible. And yet, it's everywhere. It's kind of an oxymoron in a way. It's sacred, it's special, but it's everywhere. It's everything. Everything that we understand, everything that we can have relationship with in this world was created through sex, which is kind of cool in my opinion. Another thing that's kind of cool in my opinion, and this is absolutely 100% stemming from my linguistic English background, but the fact that the sacral chakra and the prefix sacro or sacro means holy is kind of insane to me. We have sacral, we have sacred, and they are both in the same line of etymology, meaning something that is holy, something that is maybe not necessarily religiously affiliated, but something that is highly, highly, highly regarded by the spiritual realm, which is really cool, in my opinion. To me, it makes so much sense that this, I guess, area of the body, but also the energy that is associated with the sacral chakra, sacral meaning the sacrum, which is a bone in your lower spine, and it's very close to all of those reproductive organs, quite literally where you create life. And therefore, your creative energy flows from here. It is the most natural part of the body that does the creating. And I just also think that that is super cool, how it all sort of ties together in that way. Sex is sacred, and our most authentic creative energy is also sacred because it all comes from the same place. And yet again, that prefix comes up, the sacred, the sacral, it all means completely holy and genuine and pure and beautiful. And we learn about the reproduction of plants. We learn about hermaphroditic animals, all of the ways that these things happen in early biology. I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but I took biology in 10th grade. That's like what the whole class is about. It's about reproduction. It's about creation. But even before then, in 5th grade, you're learning about plant parts. You're learning about what makes new life happen. And the answer to that, the simple answer to that is sex. But there's a separation between the way we learn about the things around us, the nature that we associate with, the species that we are on this planet with, and the way that we learn about our own sex, which, if you think about it, is just so weird and interesting and kind of sad because, as I've said many times on the show before, we are all nature. Humans are not separate from the rest of the world, the rest of the natural living world. We are animals, just as any other animal is an animal. But yet, our sex, our creative energy is gross and a taboo and something that we don't want to talk about and something that we shouldn't discuss because, like I said earlier, it's only for a certain type of person and it's only reserved for certain very small places to talk about or experience. And that brings up a whole host of issues, namely shame. When we are prohibited from having any sort of conversation or any sort of understanding beyond those few and far between allowed socially acceptable spaces, and those in and of themselves are problematic, but we'll talk about that in a moment. When those are the only places and opportunities that we have to talk about sex or get our questions answered or figure out what's going on with our bodies, with our hormones, with our relationships, then we are kind of in the dark as young people, as any age person, but mostly, young people go throughout their childhoods, go throughout their teenagerdom, go throughout then their adulthood, largely confused about what to do or who they are as a person, what their sexuality is and what it means to them, what they are or are not allowed to do in relation to their upbringing, their religion, their beliefs about themselves and the world and other people. So that breeds a lot of shame. A lot. This societal norm also breeds a lot of issues in communication with a partner. If you are somebody who grew up in a similar way to most kids in our society have grown up, the lack of understanding of how sex works and the lack of the communication around it sets us up really poorly for being able to communicate well to future partners and to know how to handle our own bodies, to understand our bodies, to know what can happen and what dangers are posed when we get into unfamiliar situations. Why are they unfamiliar? Because we can't talk about them. We learn about the pistil and the ovary of most plants at the age of 12, but yet books like Romeo and Juliet are being contested at the high school level because there's too much sexual content, and we're not supposed to be exposed to that level of sexual content regarding humans. Make it make sense. I'm an English teacher. I deal with this every single day. And how did we even get here in the first place? Where did this separation between the sexual and creative nature of the entire world, where did we separate ourselves from that reality that occurs literally constantly all the time, over and over, and is the most normal and most natural thing to exist on this planet? Where did that happen? Where did we get separated? I think the first thing to address is the fact that not all cultures worldwide think in this way. There are many cultures that still think of sex as a very sacred, very creative, and very wonderful thing. And different communities go about that in different ways. There are lots of places where sexual conversation is open and is valuable and encouraged. But I think I would be remiss to consider America to be one of those. America is so weird because it is so prudish and so scared of sex, and yet at the same time we are so horny for lack of a better word. Like, we glorify it, we obsess over it, it's all our media focuses on, and yet we're not supposed to be having it outside of some really random and strange boundaries. I think something that I've noticed a lot in the little bit of research that I've done for this is the fact that a lot of our fear and distaste of sexual conversations, sexual energy, is a fear of morality going wrong, and mortality. So the morality piece of this is interesting because that also had to come from somewhere. So I was thinking through it and I'm like, I feel like at least in America and in European cultures, I guess Western cultures in general, we are all pretty largely falling out of our Puritan ancestry, and that still has a really big hold on a lot of our culture. The Puritans did not engage in any sex outside of marriage and outside of the sole purpose being reproduction. It kind of makes sense in this conversation because that's what sexual energy is. The purpose of it is reproduction. However, getting in touch with that sexual energy is not something that should be completely closed off or dirty or immoral, something that would send somebody to hell, because it is such a sacred energy and something so brilliant and amazing to be able to tap into. And the fact that our bodies just have this in and of itself is a miracle. I think it's incredible. When relating it to the fact that there is a complete energy source through this part of us, our creative energy, the thing that helps us move ideas along, the thing that helps us get inspired, that helps us be excited to live our lives. When we think of it through that lens, why would we only want to access it during that one super specific time? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, doesn't really matter what I think. The fear of God, the fear of being vanquished from heaven, from being exiled from the Holy Kingdom and from the people around you who are supposedly doing the right thing at all times and who are supposedly following all the rules of mortality, who are guaranteed to get into heaven, whatever it may be. There's a lot of things that encourage people in that society to follow suit, right? If there is a moral code for how to live, the people who live outside of that moral code nowadays still experience that same form of exile, because if you're not behaving the way that is going to get you into heaven or to get you looking like a good high class quality citizen is not a good look for you. It's not going to end well for you. You're going to lose friends. You're not going to be accepted. If you are a quote unquote sexual deviant, you have no place in your community, or in that community in the very least. Back in the day, if you were a deviant in any way, you could be killed. If people found out that you slept with somebody outside of marriage, or you engaged in sexual activity in any capacity that did not have to do with producing a child, then you could be killed, you could be exiled from the community, arrested, called a witch. There's so many punishments that were given to any person who was a deviant. And it all comes back to this one moral code that was kind of invented over time by a group of humans. And I don't know for what reasons that would have been, but that is essentially the moral code that we have been left with over hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it makes a lot of sense that we are still kind of clinging to this idea that sexual energy is bad, gross, immoral, gonna get us killed, gonna get us punished, gonna leave us hurt. All of those wounds are still there. And I cannot hope to be the sole person that changes this entire dynamic. Absolutely not. I think there are plenty of people who are already out there doing this work. I think if you are somebody who embraces their sexuality and even just embraces your creative energy, you are already doing this work. But the conversation needs to be destigmatized. And that's what I hope to do in having this conversation right here on this podcast, even though it somewhat makes me nervous. I realize that that is me kind of brushing up on that wound of, this is a taboo subject. I shouldn't talk about it. This isn't what I do. I don't care. It's what I'm doing now. I want to embrace the fact that this is an important conversation, and I believe a paradigm shift that should occur. Why should it occur, you may ask? Well, let's talk for a moment just about some of the possibilities that would come out of a more liberated sexual energy for the collective. First off, the word liberated means to be free, and I find it quite interesting how this dynamic has sort of shifted in especially the US in the past decade, maybe 2 decades. The idea of freedom is something that is so important to the ethos of this country. However, freedom comes with a lot of if, ands, or buts, and people who do not belong within that category. There's a lot of talk about freedom, but not a lot of action relating to freedom. And that includes the conversation of sexual liberation and creative liberation. They both go hand in hand. It's reserved for certain people in certain spaces to do certain things. And of course, like we kind of just mentioned a few minutes ago, we have a very weird and perverse view of sexual energy in this country because it is fetishized. It is, in a way, over-sexualized. And I think those two ideas can kind of go synonymously, because as I was doing a little bit of research for this episode and trying to find out why our culture is so sex negative and afraid to talk about it, it's really hard to find a lot of good concrete data on this. It's like really the conversation has not been had all that much. We just kind of exist in this weird ecosystem of a lot of people having no sense of their own sexual energy, no sense of wanting to talk about it and just kind of going along with the status quo that there is a specific time and a specific place. And sure, that is true to some extent. There are definitely like inappropriate times to have conversations about this, but that doesn't mean that it is an inherently bad conversation. It is an inherently evil conversation, although a lot of people have been conditioned to feel that way. I say all of this to say, I think the reason for that and the reason why it's so difficult to find any information about this is because we have conflated sex in Western cultures with actual like PIV sex, with porn, with the most outlandish, deviant, crazy stuff, and it has become inappropriate. However, the creative energy, the reproductive energy, that pure sexual energy has never been evil, has always been sacred, but we have lost sight of that connotation of it. And that's not what most people think of when they think of sex. You know what I mean? So this is important because imagine what we would feel like within our own bodies and in relationship with others if this was just a comfortable topic. If this was just something that we acknowledged as existing and synonymous with what happens in the rest of the natural world. Imagine what it would do if each individual felt comfortable with their sexuality. They were free, liberated to explore their sexuality and what that means to them. And that there weren't so many weird stereotypes about people who are comfortable in those conversations already. Just imagine how much more relaxed we might be. Imagine how much more safe we would feel if we all had similar and coherent conversations about consent and about our own bodies, and we understood what is appropriate and inappropriate on a universal level. People have different definitions of this right now, and I do think that that's kind of part of the problem in a way. There's not one core understanding of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. So there's a lot of tension revolving around these kinds of conversations. Even worse than just mere tension is the pushback in our political spheres, like Roe v. Wade. We've seen a lot of pullback on women's healthcare and our own bodily autonomy in the past couple of years. And I believe that that is because conservative and puritanical valued people want to cling to the control of half of the population, because if they cannot maintain control of it, then they are, again, very, very morally afraid of what could happen to society. And it doesn't make sense to me, because I think I have already made my ideas clear on this, that sex and bodily autonomy and freedom with what we choose to do with that energy is literally the most natural thing ever. But for some very, very, very conditioned cultures, old habits die hard. And I think right now we are seeing that fight for control, and it's misguided. But I'll bring all of this back to the why and the hopeful outcome of more people engaging in sexual liberation in general, just imagining and envisioning a future where our sexual energy is synonymous with our creative energy. Our sexual energy as humans is synonymous with the natural energy of the world, of the reproductive world. I just believe that seeing ourselves more and more and more as nature, because we are, is so vital to the longer term work that I believe is now taking place in our collective. And it's really exciting. It's also really scary to see in certain places and in certain ways. But in this, I think there's a lot of hope. And I think that it is attainable. true liberation of our bodies and true bodily autonomy for all comes from a place of understanding and education and acceptance of people who are different from us. So I recognize that the flip side of this whole conversation, and I was trying to find a way to mention this as well, is not to convince everybody who hears this to go, have a bunch of sex and not be safe about it and change the ways that you are currently having sex or not having sex. It's not about that at all. It's purely just about the ability to make a choice for yourself and the ability to tap into that energy because it is sacred and because it is so valuable to our peace of mind and also to our enjoyment of life. That's it. So I hope that in talking about all of this, it doesn't come off as me trying to indoctrinate anybody or to make you act differently. It's not at all about that. It's just a matter of thinking of it perhaps in a slightly different way and opening up our perception of what this energy is, what it's connected to, and what it can do for us. And the ultimate goal is to feel empowered and to liberate our own individual selves in the largest way we possibly can. Of course, lawmakers might have a different idea, and it may take quite a long time to kind of get back to the trajectory that we were on before the recall of Roe v. Wade. I don't know if that's the correct way to say it, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. It's important to continue to fight the good fight and make sure that all people have full autonomy of themselves, their bodies, and their choices. So aside from listening to a podcast that might be a little bit off the wall and it might be a little bit ranty, what are some other ways that we can kind of get that creative energy flowing? What are some other ways that we can liberate ourselves in our own lives, in our own ways, and feeling important and pivotal and bringing about great change? I feel like my sick brain is coming back, and I'm so sorry if I am not making sense or I'm saying things weird. I'm feeling it, but we're going to keep going. My main tip with this obviously is to continue the conversation elsewhere in your life. And I had mentioned just a few minutes ago that I was going to talk about some of the systems that we currently have in place that may not be the best. And maybe you know where I'm going with this, but as a teacher, I am pretty familiar with the ways that sex ed is taught in schools. And this is something that has honestly always bothered me. Even when I was a kid going through it, I was like, this seems wrong to me. So there's an important nuance here that has to do with having age appropriate conversations with kids and young people about sex. And there are a lot of ways that people go about this. I think something that we need to societally open up a little bit more to is the idea of having honest and truthful conversations with kids about their own experiences of their bodies and other people's bodies. The way that we have always communicated this to children in a large scale way has not been the most beneficial. We all know that there are a lot of problems with the sex education of schools in America in particular, which I will get into. There's also issues, though, that happen a lot sooner, like the fact that a lot of children do not know the words for their own genitalia until they are much, much older. And that can really cause a lot of confusion, especially in situations when you are vulnerable to another person and that person can pick up on the fact that you don't understand your own body. That goes without saying that can be an incredibly dangerous situation. And if that child had known what their parts were called and what they are for and how to protect themselves, then hopefully that situation would be a lot less common. in any case, being able to provide children with a better understanding of what sex is, and not only the human capability of it, but the parallels that we see between our own bodies and the things that happen in nature. If we approached this conversation with that lens first and foremost, I think it would make a lot more sense to a lot more people. And just to quickly get into the side of the sex ed, the public school sex ed in particular, of course, people are going to feel different ways about it. Of course, parents might be uncomfortable with letting their kids have that knowledge at certain ages. However, it is undeniable, and it is a part of our biology that when we hit puberty, we are curious about sex. So it only makes sense that at that point in time, conversations need to be had and things need to be understood. There are many ways to lead up to this time in a person's life that can be unbelievably beneficial for them if they are getting the proper guidance from a trusted adult in their life. So I'm reading a little bit from an article called An Age by Age Guide to Talking to Kids About Sex. And this is a really great framework, I think, for laying out what is probably necessary for anybody to know until they reach that point of puberty, and whether or not they are ready, they're going to start feeling some of that sexual energy, right? So talking to toddlers about sex is like not exactly something that we would do, but before they're even verbal, we should be talking to them about their bodies, being anatomically correct and using the correct words for their genitalia, the same way that you would use any other word relating to a body part, like a leg or an arm or a hand. It's all the same, and it should be addressed and presented as the same. It's not something to shy away from. It's not something to completely keep hidden. It is something that they need to have if they're to communicate to you or a doctor about any health issues or concerns. They need to know the correct terminology in order to communicate that. Going from there, after you've built on that early language, it's time for understanding consent. You should not force your child to hug or show physical affection for anybody, and they should be able to kind of name what it feels like when a person makes them uncomfortable, right? It's once they hit preschool, early elementary school, that is critical that they understand the basic concept of consent. And I also think, and this is also from this article that I'm looking at, parents should also be teaching their kids to ask for permission before touching somebody else. Consent works both ways. We teach kids to understand what giving consent looks like, but also what it looks like to get consent from somebody else. I do that all the time with my high schoolers. You know, it's not a common thing to touch a student, but, you know, if they give me a gift for Christmas or my birthday or something, I usually go, "Can I give you a hug? That is so sweet. Thank you so much. That means so much to me." And that right there, if they don't want to hug, then we don't hug. Like, that's point blank period consent. And those are high schoolers, but truthfully, I believe a first grader should understand that concept of, I don't really want to hug that person, so I am not going to do that, and they are not entitled to my body in that way. This is important because if we don't acknowledge the issues and the disempowerment that we have created within ourselves, therefore with others, in our communication with others, in our understanding of others, then we are at a major loss. This is something that should be talked about more often and resolved and looked at differently, spoken about differently, so that we can have a lot more nourishing and safe, frankly, relationships with other people and with ourselves. That goes back to the whole conversation about shame. It's like, if we don't understand our own capabilities, if we don't understand the fact that our sexual energy is not inherently bad, is not inherently something that needs to be hidden away or not talked about, it is not shameful. It is literally the most normal thing ever. And it's worth feeling normal about and just like not so weird about. Why are we so weird about this? Anyway, I would say the last thing as far as pushing this forward and continuing the work in liberation of not only our sexual energy, because that's not at the end of the day what this is all about, but our creation energy and our tie to the natural world. This is a connector between every living thing on the planet. And that gets back to the very beginning of this episode, but it's true. That is the core of all of this. It is so natural. It is so normal. And I just don't think we should be treating it as this weird taboo thing, because it's not. So the last thing that I would suggest as far as kind of continuing this work in our own life would be to, aside from having conversations like we just talked about, and aside from educating the people in our lives at a young age so that they grow up more comfortable and more aware of their body and the body's capabilities, is to also practice getting engaged with this energy. And that does not mean just having sex. That's not what I mean. What I mean is meditating on that part of the body. When you lie down, when you meditate, when you're in a moment of stillness, feeling into the sacral part of the body. Feeling that bone, the sacrum, feeling that area, and just putting a little bit of extra attention on it. That in and of itself doesn't always make us immediately feel more creative, but when we give it attention, when we start to visualize the creative aspects of our lives, the things that we like to create, the conversations that we want to have, the relationships that we want to nurture, the productive parts of our lives. When we can visualize that and at the same time meditate on that part of the body, it opens us up to want to engage with that more. It almost compounds on itself. The initial idea of just thinking about the creations that we want to put out into the world and the ways that we want to expand that part of our life in whatever way that may be, just the thought and just the intention behind it can inspire us to act. It can inspire us to create. It can inspire us to have these opening conversations with other people in our lives. Maybe it inspires us to get a little bit more spontaneous and creative in actual sexual situations. Whatever it manifests as, it's all the same energy. It's all coming from the same life force. And building on that, focusing on that, and intending to do more with it makes us more empowered. It makes us feel like there's more that we can do to improve not only our life, but the lives of people around us. It's a very inspiring and very outward sort of energy. And that is, again, why I think it's so important that we focus on this work, at least from time to time, because it really is expansive and connecting. And I think we need quite a lot of that in our world right now. So, that was a lot. And I feel like this is kind of a good place to settle it for right now. But as always, if you have any feedback or thoughts, I would love to hear them from you. And you can always reach out to me on Instagram. I check my DMs frequently. And I truly love hearing from you, even if it's just to say like, hey, I listened and I liked it or whatever. Reach out, and if you've gotten this far, thank you. Because again, I don't know where my sick brain just took us, but I hope it was a fun one. I hope you enjoyed it. And before we go, I'll finish up with the tradition on this podcast, which is to play a little game of We're Not Really Strangers. I always pull from the Healing Expansion Pack. And if you haven't heard of this before, We're Not Really Strangers is a game that's been around for a couple years now, probably since like 2020. And I'm still so in love with it. It is a card game that you can ask your friends or your loved ones or your partner or whoever, maybe even just yourself, vulnerable questions. It's a chance to get a little bit more connected to whoever you're with. And I love this expansion pack in particular because it falls right in line with the main content of Led to Gold. It's about healing. It's about taking the hard parts of life and learning something from them. And that's what we're going to do right now. So if you happen to want to journal along, it's always a great opportunity to do so. And we'll go ahead and pull a card. I'll share and we'll kind of muddle on it together. Okay, here we go. What is a boundary you can set with yourself today that will benefit future you? Oh man, this is a good one. It's not something I've thought about in a while, but I was watching an episode of Mickey Atkins' YouTube channel last night. And if you haven't heard of her, she's a really awesome therapist who makes a lot of content about like therapy and therapy related topics on YouTube. You should definitely go check her out. I'll link this episode in the show notes if you're interested. But she was talking about how sometimes boundaries and setting too many boundaries or like getting too serious about boundaries can kind of defeat the purpose of having a boundary. And I won't get too much into the detail of that episode, but I remember her also saying that boundaries are about you. And in fact, I think we've even talked about that on an episode of the podcast way back. But boundaries are about an action that you will do rather than something that you want somebody else to do. It's not about changing another person's behavior. It's about kind of changing your own behavior relating to the situation. So I say that because the boundary that I would probably set for myself would be if I am engaging in a conversation and I'm noticing myself getting annoyed or feeling like I'm not heard, or just in general, the conversation is not going in a direction that I feel good about. Something that I often find myself doing is getting really passive aggressive or just kind of cold and like shutting down, which never feels good. So a boundary that I think I want to at least be a little bit more cognizant of is feeling when that happens and then actually verbally telling the other person, I'm noticing myself not reacting well to this, whatever we're talking about. So I think I want to just end this conversation here, gather my thoughts, and then we can continue later. And that would not inherently be their fault. It might be my fault that the conversation is going south, but one way or another, it's me taking responsibility for the way that I might act if I don't speak up. And I think that's ultimately what a boundary is supposed to be. So yes, in the future, I'm going to try to be better about that. I'm going to try to notice how I'm feeling as I'm having a hard conversation or something that is just not going well and saying, hey, I don't like where this is going. It's not on you. I just want to kind of pause and gather my thoughts, and maybe we can pick this back up in a little bit. Sounds healthy to me. I don't know. How about you? What is a boundary that you could set with yourself that would benefit future you? Let me know. I always am a little late to this, but oftentimes if you're listening on Spotify, I try to change the Q&A on the episode to this question. So if it's not there, that's okay. But I'm going to try to make sure that I do that. So if you want to, you can answer right there on Spotify. But other than that, you guys, thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for sticking around. This was kind of a lengthy one for a solo episode, but I'm really excited about it. And I feel validated. I feel like the universe is sending me good signals that this is something that needs to be shared. And if you got this far, I am so appreciative and I love you. And I will see you in 2 weeks back here on the podcast, or if you are following along on the blog, I'll see you this coming Monday. So thanks for being here yet again, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.